Gentlemen, how we doing?
Doing well.
Everyone? Yeah, awesome. I was listening to that music. I'm like, I think that's '05. Is that last year? I don't know. And it was funny. Justin, our COO of the Cadets, played some drum stuff from, last year with this 5 minute setup to our live stream we did last Thursday. And I think all the drum guys were like, "Oh, tick, watch that left hand. Oh, the flam. Oh, geez, it's crazy." So, well, first of all, welcome to our panel, our viewers. My name is Tom Ongst. I'm excited tonight that we have some of the best percussion educators and front ensemble arrangers from the 90s and the 2000s. Before we get started, I do want to thank the cadets. And behind the scenes, we have Justin Moore, who is our COO, the director of the corps, Denise Bonfiglio, and Brad Martin, who is the marketing manager. So thank you to the cadets. So our panelists tonight, we have Neil Larrabee, and Neil and I worked together from, let's see, 93 up until 2008. So, he was the front ensemble arranger and I was the battery arranger. And there was a point, not now though, there's a point that people used to get us mixed up, and then they figured out that was the smarter one and the better looking one, and everyone can see that tonight. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, I was cool.
You do look good though. You shaved. You look like Santa Claus the other day. All right. Next we have Jim Casella, and Jim looks very professional in his working environment. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Jim, I think his what he did was kind of special because he wrote for the front ensemble and the battery, and you don't have a lot of guys doing that. I have to give props to myself. I did that in 92, 93, and some of 94 before Neil took over. But I think what was cool about your stuff, Jim, was just very cohesive, coordinated, and it was, you try to get one thought from a percussion group. So you probably didn't have to talk to anyone. You just kind of went in a room and went, all right, Jim, I'm going to do this. Jim, I'm going to do that. You went back and forth. So, yeah. But yeah. Welcome. Glad that you're here.
Thanks.
Yes, sir. And Jeff Lee. How's it going, Jeff? How you doing? Yes, and Jeff, we're talking about this tonight. I wasn't sure the years he was with the Blue Devils, but I guess it was 93 up to 2003. 2002. And here's the thing with the Blue Devils. We had Scott Johnson on last Thursday, and I wanted to find out what that magic was. I mean, you're talking, almost 5 decades of this dynasty, this competitive excellence, and Jeff was part of that. So maybe Jeff, you'll give us a few secrets tonight on the Blue Devils. But thank you for being here.
Of course.
All right, and last but not least, we have Mr. Eric Johnson, who is make sure I get this right. You're the founder of Innovative Percussion, yes?
Correct.
Yes. Okay, so my impression of what Eric did with the Cavaliers, and I believe it was 95 to the mid 2000s, we had to listen to ensembles differently because now all of a sudden, the pit was playing, it seemed like 5 minutes, and finally it was like the pit could be rock stars. Because if you think about the activity, it's about drums. It's about rudimental drumming. So to me, watching the Cavaliers, it was like they're still playing and it's great, and people are like, wow. So I think you kind of change the landscape of how front ensembles are going to be used in an ensemble. So I do want to say that these 4 gentlemen tonight, I picked them because Neil helped me with this. From 94 up until 2005, these arrangers were with ensembles that competed for the high percussion trophy. I think it was, again, 94 up until 2005. There was a lot of other great stuff going on, but I thought this would be a good place to start for tonight. All right, so let's get to the 90s. And I think to do that, we have to talk about the 70s. And people are like, oh, man, the 70s. Well, I started marching in the 70s. But let's talk about, we didn't have front ensembles. We didn't have pits. We had marching keyboards, bells, xylo, vibes, marimba. And they were heavy. They were really heavy. And then heavier were marching timpanis, which is crazy for me. I mean, I don't know if they carried a 32, but I know there were 29s out there, and straps. Now, the good news was they started at the back of the field and went to the front of the field. That was about it. We get into the 80s. and we start to ground these instruments because visually they weren't going to be able to handle what drum lines and horn lines were going to do. I mean, we had George Zingale like running the drum line like it was a horn line. So when we grounded the front ensemble, we made stands, and then I remember going to New York City and renting from Carol Music professional percussion concert style instruments. So a lot of groups I think maybe had two marimbas, two vibes, a xylo, chimes, timpani, and we were starting to kind of be a legit percussion ensemble up front, a front ensemble, right? The thing that was fascinating to me, if you look back, was players moved around. If you played xylophone, maybe in the first part of the opener, you might go to the marimba, or you might go to the timpani, you might go to the chimes. And I think we were thinking holistically. We were thinking about making the players well-rounded. And so we get into the 90s, and all of a sudden we're moving on into kind of virtuosic playing and four marimbas, five marimbas, four vibes, five vibes. So we're in the 90s. The question for you guys, because I've talked enough now, is how did you get started writing for your corps? I mean, these four corps were at the top of their game. Did you march in the corps? Were you an instructor, and now it was your turn? So how did this happen that all of a sudden, bam, you guys are writing for these top corps? So let's go to Neil first.
Okay, I think my story is probably a little different than these guys because I wasn't affiliated with the Corps at all. You and I connect really through industry, and with no intention to work together, but a synergy began the longer we kind of connected, and there was a musical connection. I think that's always been one of your strengths, is that you attract people, and you're open and you listen, and you're always looking at how can someone add. You're always looking what can be new, what can add to. And I remember you saying, maybe we could do some work together, and that might be cool. So 93 was a first year, but it was really more of a consultancy. And I'll be honest, it was probably more, I think I learned a hell of a lot more than anything I may have doled out for info. So, it was kind of a onboarding for me, a learning. I contributed a little bit. I think I did a little bit with the ballad and a couple rewrite things, but it was really getting my feet wet and kind of getting inside the fabric of how the organization worked. And as you mentioned, 94, then, I had the second half of the show. You were ready to kind of, give me some room on my own. And by 95, that was my first year. So, my drum corps experience first was in a very small drum corps, and I played duo toms in that drum corps. And the honest to God thing is, if I had stayed one more year, I would have played marching timpani. I'm not kidding. I was excited to get off duo toms, and I won.
The sound projectors.
What's that?
The sound projectors.
Yeah. So my path a little different than probably some of these guys, because again, we connected in a different way, but an opportunity came on. We blended, and we had a good connection. He gave me a shot, and away we went.
Yeah. Well, I think we had a good connection personally too. And I know we always talk about the Capricorn thing. You're January 8th and I'm the 3rd, and we have this, I guess this fight or this angst, I guess, right? In us that, this drive, maybe that's a better word. So I think there was a strong connection, but I always tell people what did Neil bring to the table when it came to front ensemble writing? And I always thought it was taking virtuosic, like an individual player, and what someone would play on a marimba, and you go, wow, that's incredible, and then you orchestrate that for the front ensemble. I mean, there was some amazing stuff that we were doing, and I'd watch it and go, like, I couldn't quite figure it out. Like, what is happening here, And you didn't maybe think like that, but the ensemble kind of presented that. That was my impression of what you brought, was just like this, just kept coming at you and doing stuff that was like only one player do, but it was orchestrated, throughout the front ensemble.
But I appreciate that. I think probably we all would have a similar thing to say, is that we came into organizations that already had high levels of achievement, like phenomenal levels of achievement, and there was a huge responsibility. I think we all probably felt that. It's like, man, if this is my time, man, I gotta make this thing happen. And you wanna
Yeah.
be genuine, and like you're not copying something, but you don't want to go, you don't want to be crazy, and that you're just trying to have your own identity for the hell of it. So you try to get in a good space. And I think when you work with good people, you can get in a good space where you can tap into your strengths and be present to, what's going on around the organization. And listen, it doesn't hurt to be writing with Jay Bokook and Tom in terms of the material you're working with. To you fit in that structure, you get inside what the music really needs, and if you're genuine, then you probably have a pretty damn good shot of doing okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe we go to Jeff, because I tell you what, I'm always fascinated with the Blue Devils. I guess it's this competitive excellence for almost five decades. And so you were a part of that in the 90s. So where did you start, and how did you get in and do the kind of stuff that you did at the Blue Devils?
Well, it all kind of goes back, when I got my background really prior to drum corps was orchestral, and it was contemporary solo percussion literature when I was getting my master's degree. And actually, Ralph Hardiman came in my first year for the first semester and helped out with the marching band, and lived in Fresno. And we finished rehearsal. It was the last rehearsal of the season, and we went to Wiener Schnitzel and got a bunch of chili cheese dogs and a bunch of corn.
Something in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and a bunch of corn dogs. And so we're sitting there just scarfing the food down, and he said, "You're going to be in Santa Clara." I was like, huh? And I said, "Ralph, I just got married a few months ago. How do I do that?" And he says, "We're going to make your wife dinner." And so we went to the grocery store, we bought a bunch of food, and he and I prepared it. And it was like, and Ralph's a very good cook.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it was brutal, and he talked her into it. And so I was in Santa Clara in '88, taught the pit in '89 for at least a portion of the season, and then was just teaching high school, and moved to Clovis West High School in California, where I was working with a guy named Dave Glide. And
I don't know that name.
yeah,
That again?
yeah, and a guy named Romero Barrera.
Oh.
Romero was the program coordinator for Blue Devils. Dave at the time was the caption head. And I did my first year at Clovis West. And they said, oh, maybe it was my second year. And then they said, you gotta write for the Blue Devils.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Well, it was kind of, yeah, it took me several phone calls with Key Poland to understand how G bugles transposed to C. It was like, wait, do I go up a fourth or down a fifth?
I forgot about that.
In there.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know you marched in Vanguard. I didn't know you taught Vanguard. So was Bob Morrison writing the front stuff?
Bob did it in '88.
Yeah.
Ralph wrote in '89. I think Bob did a little bit. And then Ralph asked me to rearrange some of the music for the front ensemble. So I did that. And,
The rest is history, right?
well, it's just, I guess it's being in the right place at the right time and being good to people that, it's not like I went to Clovis West hoping I was going to be working at the Blue Devils, but
Right.
It just so happened that worked out.
Well, I'm sure they saw something in you from a a talent standpoint and what you could bring to the table for them. I mean, I think that's how it was for me with Neil. I thought, man, I think there's a lot that he can bring that, again, I was writing, but you know, it was limited because of where I was at with my skills. And I said, you know what, I got to get someone better. So I think Blue Devils and Ralph saw something special in what you did, and you obviously did great things for a long time there. It was it was really pretty cool. And I think before the call, we were talking about like those propane tanks. What year was that? Was that 94?
It was 93.
94.
We used the oxygen tanks, scuba tanks in 94. And
Yeah.
I think we used them again in 95 because one of the pieces we were doing was the same piece.
Yeah. Well, so imagine that. Now it's like, oh, we want scuba tank sound. All right, we go to our sound guy, gets in. All right, here's those scuba tank sounds. Back then, and here's a funny story. Like 2005, we did. I think the percussion piece was called Machine. Yeah, and so Jamie Eckert, who was my front ensemble tech at the time,
Yeah.
we had to go find those sounds. So we drove with his pickup truck, and went to a local junkyard. And we loaded it up.
Piece.
And
That is it
20 bucks
right
later,
there, man.
we put the junk on the ground in between the marimbas, and when we got to that piece, it's like, now it's like you go to the computer and go, give me some junk.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. All right. How about we go to Jim? Because I know you were involved. Did you march with the Vanguard Cadets, or did you teach there? So maybe tell us kind of how you got started with, I guess, the World Class Corps.
Yeah, I marched in Vanguard from 89 through 91. I was in the baseline.
Wow.
Actually,
And Cater.
yeah.
Yeah.
Kent Cater is actually largely, yeah, I mean, he has a lot to do with me even having a career, really, because like
Wow.
I went to San Jose State to study with Tony Cerrone, and I was going to be a legit classical player and just kind of go down that road. And I did a lot of that for a while, but to try to really focus on that, I wasn't going to do any more marching stuff after I got out of high school. I just wanted to be like the legit guy. And one of the guys in the marching band had moved to San Jose to go to school at San Jose State he had marched in the Florida Wave back then. He had come out to San Jose because he wanted to try out for the cymbal line at Vanguard because they've got this famous cymbal line. And I gave him my whole story about like, no, I'm going to be like a classical player and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, just come try out for the cymbal line. And, you can keep your concert snare chops and, you can still march drum corps. And I was like, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. And so, and we were both in the marching band at San Jose State at the time. So we knew each other well, and Kent Cater taught the drum line for the San Jose State marching band. So that's where the connection kind of started. And so I went on a Thursday night. That's when Vanguard had their auditions and their kind of weekly rehearsals at the time. Grabbed some plates and auditioned in this mirror room at the Corps Hall, and I don't know, it was probably about 2 hours and felt like about 20 hours. Like I just like realized immediately I was completely not cut out to be in the cymbal line. I was just way too much of a wimp. And so, but I, at that point I had already kind of like had that bug in my head. Like, yeah, I think I still want to do drum corps. I've still got a few years left. And so that's when I started getting the idea, like, maybe I could be in the bass line and I could still keep my classical chops and everything. And so I talked to Kent because he taught the marching band at San Jose State, and his eyes just kind of lit up and went, come on down. And, like that's, it was a pretty easy connection to get in there. And it was still hard, but, and I hadn't marched bass drum before in any sort of a marching context, but it was a great way in, and it was a good year to start. So like, that's just kind of what I did. And so I kind of like marched bass drum and then studied classical music when I was in college. And then after aging out of drum corps, I got hired by J.W. Custer, who at the time was the director of the Vanguard Cadets. He hired me to be the caption head and start writing the book for the Vanguard Cadet Corps, which is a feeder corps for Vanguard.
Yep.
So I jumped on that because I was like just totally all about it, and I wanted to basically I just wanted to be Ralph Hardiman, basically.
Well, didn't we all, right?
Yeah. You know, like classical background and have this like playground of drum corps to write for. So yeah, I was just all over that, and just like, you know, kind of like Jeff said, just being at the right place at the right time, just being lucky, got that gig. And, you know, flash forward a few years, Vanguard was going through some transitions because Gail Royer, the founder of Vanguard,
Yep.
passed away after the '92 season. And they had a few, you know, kind of just transitional years in there where they were, you know, just kind of trying to find their new identity without Gail around, which, I mean, how could that not be the case? And after the '95 season, JW, the former Cadet Corps director, got hired to be the A Corps director, and gave me a call and said, "Hey, do you want to come on board and do this thing?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, I would love to do that." But also didn't realize how like kind of out of my league I was either at the time. You know, just didn't know what I was getting myself into. But it was just all about, you know, trying to do the right thing for the Corps, trying to make a statement musically, and try to carry the torch as best as we could with kind of the young crew that we had in place at the time. So
So that was 95, right?
and the '96 season was the first year I started at Vanguard.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
Here's interesting. You know, you speak of Gail Royer. You know, that's someone I looked up to. And I remember, I think it was '85. We were at a show, and I think we saw Vanguard like 10 times. And you know, I don't think we beat them really until the end. And you know, he walks over. You know, I know who he is. I don't think he knows who I am. So he comes over and he says, "Hey," I said, "Hey, Gail, how's it going?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "You're doing a good job. Thanks, man." He just kind of walked away. I'm like, "Oh, cool."
That's a great moment.
Yeah, it was like, I remember it. I can still see the stadium. It's just, you know, I think we're up in, I don't know, the Midwest somewhere. And another story too was, you talk about the cymbals, man. I think it was 2005. We were in California. I think it was the Riverside show, and we had gone on and we came out, and I think it was 4 cymbal players, right? So they march down and they're doing their own thing. It's like, hey, I'm like, whoa. So they stop. And I don't know. I mean, this is 2001. So correct me if I'm wrong. They had this whole procedure, and it looked like one guy just went down the lines like, bam, and the next one, bam, next one, like right in the face. I'm like, and they just stood there like, oof, very, very military-like. And I went, the part of me is like, man, that's kind of cool. And I'm like, damn. And then the other part's like, whoa, like this is serious stuff.
And now you know I didn't make the symbol line
on the field, right? It wasn't like there was this pre-show hype and they couldn't bring it. I mean, it was always cool, you know?
Yeah.
Am I right with some of that?
Yeah, totally. A lot of that comes from Robert Shavira was the cymbal instructor for many years there. He's kind of this infamous icon of the cymbal line at Vanguard, which is kind of this really kind of coveted special section of the Corps. And Robert he was very intense. He was also like we studied with Tony together at San Jose State. We were classmates, but he was intense. And yeah, they would slap the shit out of each other right before shows, and it was like, damn.
Okay, so that I do remember that then.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes the older you get, you know, the story might stretch a little bit, but I didn't stretch that one. That's about right, huh?
Yeah, that was very real.
All right, so let's go over to Eric. And I mentioned at the start of this webinar tonight that, you know, my impression of the Cavaliers was actually, before we did the call tonight, you know, we were kind of talking about a bunch of stuff, and I said, something about the Cavaliers and then the Cadets where the Cavaliers always looked polished. Like they were always cleaning their instruments. I mean, the wheels were clean. How they moved was, and here we were with dust and wheels falling off, and we had bungee cord or duct tape trying to keep the keyboards together. But you guys just had this look. Maybe did you do those things? I mean, was your idea of kind of keeping things clean kind of part of, the front ensemble's MO? And then, like how did you get started? Because I mean, man, the Cavaliers were killing it. I mean, I think they won drums in 92 and 93, and there was a culture there of excellence already.
So to answer your first question, it was kind of a ritual for us to keep the instruments clean. They did that before I got there, but my personality is a little obsessive about things like that, and I always want things to be as clean as possible. So it was just part of the daily ritual. Actually, when we got to the show, everything was stripped and cleaned every day, and
Wow.
they would paint frames ever so often to try to keep things. I always had the approach of I wanted the judge to make up his mind before they played the first note based on how we presented ourselves professionally. So it was one of the things that the guys they adapted. Everybody got on board with it, and I think the course still does that to this day. I think it's been handed down over the years. So,
Right.
How I got started, it's kind of an interesting story because I was never a keyboard player in drum corps. I first marched tenors in a small drum corps, the Memphis Blues.
Neil, you guys have you were a duo though, so were you
Yeah.
triplets or was it duo?
I was triples, tri-toms.
Oh man,
Nice.
there's those Cavaliers again, right?
So I marched there in '83, and that was that drum corps last year. It folded mid-season. So I ended up auditioning for the Cavaliers the next year because that was the year that Jim Campbell came in,
Yep.
and Jim Brett Kuhn came in. And so I went up and auditioned, and I was fortunate enough to make it. And I don't know that I should have made it, but I did. So I marched snare drum in 1984 and 1985. I did not age out. That was my last year to march. I would have aged out in '87, but I stopped marching to go and study marimba. I went and studied marimba with Lee Stevens in the '86 and '87 summers, which has a lot to do with me doing what I do in drum corps, because I have my drum corps experience of all the technical approaches with the exercises, metronome, all that. And so I used to take that and apply that to keyboard exercises. And I kind of, again, got fanatical about it and had all these different metronome settings for every exercise. I'd start with slow things, and I had this hour-and-a-half ritual of exercises on marimba. So, so I really, kind of pushed that. I did my undergraduate work at Middle Tennessee State University, and I studied with Mark Ford there. And he was the one that had introduced me to Mark Ford, up to Lee Stevens, because he had also studied with Lee Stevens when he was younger. And Mark Ford had gone to the University of North Texas, so I ended up going to the University of North Texas as well. So I was, there was about 5 years I had nothing to do with drum corps because I was pursuing a whole different route. I happened to stay in touch though with Brett during this time, because I really connected with Brett because he, again, he was my snare tech, and I really, looked up to him, and so I stayed in touch.
Wait a minute, you looked up to Brett? Is Brett on here tonight? You
I'm
looked up to him.
I'm the first one.
If he's on here tonight, I want him to write in, but he probably doesn't have a computer. He still uses cups and a string to call people.
Pretty much.
So.
Pretty much.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So one of my, I think, second year and maybe third year of grad school, I was talking to Brett, and I said I'd be interested in, maybe teaching the corps. And and he goes, "I'll tell you what." He goes, "Let's get you a gig with a back then called Division 2-3 Corps, which is open class corps today, and give you the opportunity to kind of get your feet wet." And I said, "Okay." And so he kept that in mind, and eventually I got a call from John Wooten, and John was teaching at the University of Iowa, and I think working on his doctorate. But he was also the program coordinator for this small drum corps in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, called the Emerald Knights. And so John had called Brett for recommendation of somebody to run the drum line, and so Brett gave him my name. John, he called me, and I said, "Sure, let's do it." So I did that, for about 4 years. It was the Emerald Knights, and then it came out as the Knights. Then it was Night Express. So it was 91 through 1994. And after that time, Brett was still working on getting me into the Cavaliers because that was the plan. And I was able to come in as, kind of a consultant in 1995. I was doing some time with the pit in the wintertime and in the summertime, and also tech the bass drums a little bit that summer. And then in 1996, I came back as the full-time, front ensemble tech. And, and Brian Mason was writing the front ensemble. Well, he was writing the front ensemble on the Battery in 94, 95, and 96. Brian had given me a lot of opportunities to rescore some things and just kind of make things my own. And, and I just really kind of took to it. So in 97, Scott Kretzer started writing the full percussion book. He'd written about half the show, and he was getting a lot of input from me on the process. And I asked him if I could write the ballad, and everybody looked at me like, I don't know about this. And they thought about it, and then they gave me the opportunity. So I ended up writing the ballad in the closer that year. And then in 1998, they asked me to be the full-time front ensemble arranger. And that was, I think, Scott's last year to write. And Brett started writing in 1999, and he and I wrote together all the way through 2005. And I will say, in regard to Brett, you were talking about how you guys work together, Neil and Tom. I think it was always real important to have a good chemistry between your writers. Brett and I were, best of friends, and we are to this day. We talk all the time. So I was great friends with him. I've had the opportunity to write with 3 different guys, and that would be Brett Kuhn. Of course, I had the opportunity to write with Jim at the Cavaliers for 2 seasons, and also had an opportunity to write with Mike McIntosh at the Cavaliers for a season. So I had great experience with all 3 of these guys. They're all fantastic musicians and drummers, percussionists, and just a great experience there. So I did it through 2005. I took a couple of years off in 2006 and 2007. I came back in 2008 with Jim. We wrote in 2008 and 2009, and then Jim retired from that, and Mike McIntosh came in 2010, and I wrote the 2010 season. After that, I kind of stepped back just because of my personal life and my job were kind of going a little bit more aggressively, and I couldn't manage both. But I continued to consult with the Corps, and I did up to 2018. I think the only season I didn't consult was 2012. So
wow, yeah, that's awesome. I mean, we used to just kind of say hi in the summer at drum corps shows, but just listening to you talk, and you were talking about how stuff was cleaned, and that was kind of your personality. I could just in the last 5 minutes you talk, and I sensed your personality on the field with the front ensemble. Like Neil, being around Neil, you sensed his personality. Having Jim talk about his approach or where he came from and all that. There's just a personality that goes into, how you orchestrate and how you approach some stuff, So here's one thing. So a lot of corps, as far as instruments, I mean, right now everyone has pretty much great instruments all the time, But back then, if we can kind of go around here, like maybe I'll go back to Neil here. What were some of the instruments like and the issues that we had? I mean, you're talking G bugle, so there was a lot of intonation issues that I think we just dealt with. But what are, in general, like what was our instrumentation like, and then how did that develop?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, everyone's got to remember we were at the Cadets too, and so
yeah.
It wasn't the Blue Devils of the Vanguard.
I think the best way to put it is like when I first came, it's like the instrument was like potpourri. You know what I mean? I like a gathering of things that didn't necessarily go together in any way, shape, or form. Mixed brands. We kid about the fact that things were held together with duct tape and bungees. We literally had a show once to start the season. I'm going to say this is 99. Now maybe it's 96 or 97. Literally the first show we roll out a marimba that was an old Musser, and I'm not blaming Musser. I'm not busting on them. The instrument had way more miles on it than it deserved. And it had been in the sun so long that it was green. It was no longer resembling anything.
Yes, I remember.
We called it the Green Monster. And it had some kind of modified frame to kind of keep her together. And literally, someone in the first show, when they were moving between tunes, stepped on a flag, fell on the marimba, and it totally broke and fell apart. I mean, just like. And I kind of looked over and went, so really, what are we doing here? But no, seriously. But we didn't know any better. We didn't really have. It was before there was enough relationship, at least for us, in terms of who we were working with, that we had the luxury of the front ensemble instrument relationship. At that time, we now look at a company like Pearl Adams and they have that relationship with Adams, so that all those fantastic keyboard instruments. But in the early '90s, when we were with, they didn't have that. So you had a drum relationship, but it was up to you to kind of, the organization to figure out what they were going to do. So like I said, we had a mishmash of Musser. Hell, we even had an old Bergeron vibraphone that was 4 octaves. It was like a Cadillac. It was so big. I think
that was Dave Satterfield's personal instrument when he wrote for us in 89, 90, 91, and he just gave it to the Corps. And we had to actually get a frame somehow.
Well, listen, he didn't do us a favor.
I mean, it was 4 octaves, right? It was crazy.
He didn't do us a favor giving us that instrument. He may have done himself a favor.
Back then in '91, we thought, but maybe now we're back, the middle of
so for us,
'90s not.
The '90s for us, we went through a lot of different relationships with instruments, and we were approached by different companies, and they were willing. We had a short relationship with Premier had come to us and said, we want to work together with you guys. I think it worked for them, even though we weren't going to play the drums. Pearl didn't have that to give. So, and they were down the street in Morristown, New Jersey. So it worked. And, they were willing to, that was the first time we had a real set of instruments that were matched and that there was some consistent sonority. And
what year was that? Was that 97 maybe, 98?
97 sounds right. And I got to be honest with you. I think that's when I don't know if we want to take credit for it, but it sounds good. I think that's when Pearl got a little more like, we got to solve this problem. We can't have these cores out here being endorsed by our company or representing our company, and they're playing another brand of. So it became an urgent thing for them to make a connection with Adams, and that's been a great success for that company. But we went through a lot of that, and we did the best we could with what we had. I think is the best way to put it. I think it's 2000 the Korg switches to Yamaha, but it goes in phase. Where it's horns only in 2000, and then it's the full Korg by 2001, and now the Korg's had a consistent relationship. So listen, we've had a lot of really good relationships with a number of those companies, and so that was by far the biggest challenge of the '90s, was just kind of getting instruments that resemble the professional sound. And frankly, as you've alluded to, Tom, it was a challenge to look at other corps have such a better opportunity than us, but over time we got it there.
Right. So the Cavaliers were always playing Yamaha, right? I mean, I know they played Pearl in the '90s, but the '80s, excuse me, the '90s it was Yamaha.
Yeah, it was Yamaha. They I think switched to Yamaha back in 1987. When I marched for the Corps, they played Pearl.
So there was a guy, because we bought 2 of his frames out of Chicago.
Oh yeah, Dom Percoco.
What is it? What's his name?
Dom Percoco.
Yes.
Yeah.
We still have him at the school. So
he was a band parent.
Right?
He was a band parent at Lake Park High School, and
wow.
He let me see. I'm trying to remember how that worked out, but he was making these frames for Lake Park High School, and I think Kevin Lepper was teaching there, and that was the connection, was Kevin Lepper, because Kevin was writing for the Corps for the front ensemble back in the early '90s, and he asked Dom if he would make those frames for the Corps, and he said sure, and he started selling those frames through Kevin Lepper's company Advantage Network. And those, and the Cavaliers, we used those up until Yamaha came out with those nice fill frames. And I remember that was a big transition because we always used those and wasn't comfortable with it at first, but then obviously Yamaha did a great job making those frames.
Yeah, I do remember that. Like I said, late '90s, we ordered two, one for marimba, and then it was one for a xylophone too. So now with the Blue Devils, was it Yamaha? I mean, I know 80s was Yamaha. What did you guys use, Jeff?
We used Yamaha until I want to say 2000, and then that relationship blew up. So we went with Dynasty.
Yeah.
And at that time, they didn't have any, front ensemble solutions. And then they worked out a thing with Bergerac. Yeah, it was a mess there for a couple years, because the Bergerac stuff, it's the tuning is not stretch tuned, so it's a whole different thing, and so you don't necessarily get the depth with that. It's much more of a European type of thing. In fact, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't you think so? A lot of these companies weren't ready for what we were doing. That was part of it was, the frames, but even the playing on the instruments. And we had, being out in the sun and, 10 weeks and all that. I mean, there were dead bars all over the place. And so it took a long time to kind of, for companies to kind of figure out implements we were using and the weather and all this kind of stuff to keep that quality up.
I remember those first Yamaha Kusalon bars. What they had the really small holes.
Yeah,
remember those things. Once they got baked in the sun, they went dead.
Yeah.
I remember Brian Mason trying to put them in the freezer one time to see if he could bring them back to life. It didn't work.
You tried like things that were kind of stupid, right? You put them in the freezer. Right.
Hey, you do whatever you could.
Why not?
You could do.
Well, a lot of the solutions that we came up with, right, as a group, is how the companies learn. I mean, I always remember an old gentleman. His name was Lloyd McCausland with Remo, and he used to say that DCI is the Indianapolis 500, for musical instruments. Like if you could make tires work on an Indy race formula vehicle, then it's going to be good road tested for the average consumer. If you can make an instrument or a drum head or a drum, anything work in drum corps, you can get it to go through a season, be successful. Then that's how you road test. And honestly, our activity has since way back in the '60s probably been part of all the R&D and the forward motion of any instrument, implement, drum head. And of course relationships too. So it's been necessary.
Yeah, drum corps it's really brutal on instruments. I mean, because what the sun does to it, and then it always used to bother me. I mean, Texas is fantastic, but taking the instruments into the Texas sun, it always used to it never sat well with me because it was so intense down there. And if you could just take care of your instruments, we used to keep blankets on the instruments, and between each rep, we're covering the instruments with blankets, all season long, because you don't want your bars to overheat, and but it just the things you're pushing them across fields to get to the rehearsal field, across gravel parking lots. They take a beating, and the companies really stepped up and created these frames that just handle it fantastically.
I'm going to get to Jim in a second here, but so I was just thinking with Jeff, because his mallet that he came out with, was really, I mean, it was pretty articulate, right? Pretty staccato sounding. And I was just kind of thinking of the implements that we used in the 90s, which was it was about how to get these acoustic instruments to project upstairs, with these horns and the drums wailing in the back. And now some of that was through orchestration, but then some of that was through trying to have mallets that would project up there. And there was some stuff that we probably used back then, Neil, that we wouldn't even, we're not going to go there again. I mean, because now everything's mic'd. But maybe talk about a little bit about that, Jeff, because I know you had a mallet. I'm not sure if that came out in 2000. That was, it was, I guess, very sharp and staccato in the sound.
Well, it depends on what part of the series you're looking at. So we had some more Sassonuno mallets through a range of marimba that got pretty piercing.
When did you? I didn't mean to interrupt you. Was that developed? Was that pre mics, pre electronics?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's something actually that Neil had approached me about. If I would be interested in doing it, I think he approached Brian Mason as well.
Yep.
And Brian got to steal the mallet shaft color because I was 5 minutes late giving Neil a call. So
snooze, you lose, Jeff.
Yeah, I know. And we had, see, the 95, 96, 97. We had 4 vibe mallets that were graduated in terms of hardness as well. And then, business is business, and, some of it's maybe not selling as well as other products are. And so, a couple of things got discontinued, and that's just business. But
yeah. Well, I hate to say this, but I don't know if we did this in 92 or 93, but when the yarn came off the mallet, we used to use the rubber sometime to play on. We tried just about everything to really kind of project that sound. Now you have to understand too, like with the Cadets, and I want to talk about this, and Jim, I haven't forgotten. I'm going to get to you in a second. And I want to talk about the orchestration stuff, but at the Cadets, Jay's stuff was awesome, right? But sometimes Neil and I, like the horn line would play, we didn't have Sibelius, so we didn't have, we couldn't hear before the horn line played it. We'd sit there and I'd look at Neil and he'd look at me and I'm like, well, I guess we're not playing in this tune. And it was the opener or it was like the closer because the horns played just about everything, That was our thing, was like, there was just, the horns did everything. And then we tried to, gradually, by fighting, say, okay, we need at least 2 counts for the keyboards to go. All right, we're done now. So we were always trying to figure out how to get the front ensemble to, I guess, hear through this sound. And I know we were always jealous with the Cavaliers because we going, and they're still playing, and it's 5 minutes later. Like, God, Jesus, you got to be kidding me. But here's the thing, I'm not throwing anyone from the Cadets under the bus. I mean, there was something special about how we did that. And you look back now and you go, man, that's awesome. Like we were living it where you're going, well, there's no windows, but we figured it out. And there was something that was special about, our orchestration and our sound. But we definitely fought to try to, say, hey, we are here. So let's go to Jim here. You were at Vanguard, so you probably had the Mercedes of keyboards and everything, and everything was just perfect, right? So, all right, moving on.
Right. We were talking about bars baking in the sun. I do remember that, before the Adams relationship with Pearl came along, we were I think every other year or maybe it was every year, we were buying new bars from Musser, but we would do that in a like every other year cycle so that the previous year's show bars became the next year's practice bars. Yeah. So we always had 2 sets of bars, and those practice bars by the end of a season were just hosed. Yeah. Not just dead, but like out of tune, and and sometimes some ways they were cracked. But people hear that like you actually had 2 sets of bars for each instrument. That is the Cadillac of drum corps, but it's like when you hear them playing on that stuff, you don't think that. It sounded horrible. It was like a quarter tone apart from wherever the horn line was tuned. It was
It was
just
awesome.
just grating, terrible.
I think you got used to it, right? You got used to it.
You just make do, with the
Yeah.
heat of the summertime, and then it makes those evening shows when it's nice and cool outside just so much. They're just so much nicer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so we talk about those instruments in the 90s, and then, Neil was talking about like how, we went with Yamaha, and then it was as we moved into the 2000s, I think really to me what changed was just you had a lot of chorus with having that like instruments. You had everyone it was almost like the playing field was leveled in some respects. And there's a question on here about did we have any say in how things were developed? And we did. I mean, I think from the frames to the bars to the drums. I mean, they would come out at least twice a year, like Pearl or Yamaha, and they take notes. And you may not see it right away, but maybe a couple of years later, you would see those things that were implemented in the instruments. And I think for all of us as musicians and writers, we wanted to try to have the best possible sound from the front ensemble. We went from this really bright, articulate keyboard thing in the 80s to the 90s, and now we wanted to kind of present it in a way that sounded very professional. And so yeah, I think we had a lot to say with how we were moving forward. I think once we were able to mic the keyboards, it was almost like it was like, I guess, the Roadrunner up until we mic'd. It was like all of a sudden you mic'd, you went, oh, cool. Oh, now we can play. We can almost teach, and this is the next topic, we could almost teach the way we should teach playing those kind of instruments, right? So I don't want to get into amplification, but let's go into technique, because I was always fascinated with Cavalier technique, which was this, whatever you want to, I guess the fulcrum, right? Back finger fulcrum kind of thing. So maybe we'll go to you and talk about that. And how did that come about? I'm assuming it was like we were trying to do, like get the sound up in the stands, and that just seemed to maybe get a little bit more velocity out of the sound.
Yeah. That actually was handed down to me when I got there. That was already in place, and Brian Mason had started that. And it was such a great idea because it's just what you said. It gave the mallet head more velocity, because you're trying to create the largest sound that you possibly can. So it's just like we just kept doing that with the two mallet approach. Now with four mallets, I was obviously, they were already playing the Stevens grip and the Vibes were playing the Bird grip, and I continued with that grip, and I really pushed the piston stroke that that I'd been taught when I'd studied studied marimba, and it was a very uniform approach to it, and it was something that would all the guys were studying in college anyway. So now one of the things I did in latter years that, there are a lot of people may not agree with this, is I ended up switching the vibraphone players over to the Stevens grip also. And the reason I did that is for a technique, unity throughout the ensemble, because you're playing all these exercises, sequential stickings, double laterals, things like that. And here's the vibe guys trying to play it with Burton grip with rattan, and it's not working. So we would have to have extra, back in those days, you have to have exercises for the marimbas, then exercise package for the vibes. So we just switched everybody to the same grip, so it was unified, and it all worked out real well. But now when the guys played with four mallets, they played very forceful. It was a lot more aggressive than it looked. And even with two mallets, we wanted everything to look, very finesseful. And so, but when they played, they were bearing down on the instruments pretty hard, more so than they would when they were in their percussion studio. As a matter of fact, at the end of each season, I would have a big meeting with the front ensemble. Okay, you're getting ready to go back into reality of your percussion studio. If I get a call from any of your studio teachers because you've gone through the low C on your instruments because you're overplaying it. We're going to have a problem here, you know. So you know, just they had to be smart about it, backing it off. And you know, when we were using, you know, we had the synthetic, but then we started using the rosewood. We were always very logical about how we approached it, not to overplay the instrument, not to damage the instrument, but to get the most out of the instrument.
Right. Well, I think that's interesting you say that, because you didn't want the professor to give you a call like all the professors and go, "Hey, Eric, really? This is how you're teaching these kids how to play?" Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And, I mean, you know, nowadays I feel like groups, because of, you know, the amplification and really the upgrade of all that, we can teach the kids how to play normally, right? You know, based off of, we don't have to worry about this, like you're saying, where we, you know, a lot of velocity into the stroke. So like, Neil, what, you know, we weren't using that kind of grip. What was kind of our approach? I mean, I don't even, you know, I mean, this is, you're talking 25, 30 years ago. I'm like, I don't know. So what were we doing back then?
Well, our vibe players tended to be Burton players. Honestly, as I'm listening to Eric, I'm going, you know, I think some of our challenge was, you know, we didn't, and I mean no offense to our own organization, but you know, we were never looking at a bevy of talent or overly talented individuals. You know, it wasn't a huge stream of marimba majors or frankly sometimes even super advanced percussion majors. And again, I mean no offense when I'm saying that. It's just I think you know, we had a different base, and so we did look at vibraphone and marimba differently. I think we kind of had to. We were evolving again because of our instruments. I mean, I was thinking of this when someone else was chatting. It's like our instrumentation at one time, we had at least 2 xylophones. Like we didn't have enough marimbas, so we often were on the high end, but some of it was, you know, what we had available, what we knew to do with at that time. It took us a while to get a consistent sounding group of instruments so that we could really understand what we could better do to make a more pleasing sound, a more a full sound, a more musical sound. It really came along together. You know, you have to have a good sounding instrument to be worth having a good implementation.
Yeah.
You know, frankly, you know, that was a lot about it. It really was the 2000s for us where we turned the corner in a much more, you know, we ourselves developed our pedagogy at a higher level from, you know, from our techniques, in most particular, you know, with our Stevens technique, really by bringing on more faculty that just had a bigger intelligence base. You know, in particular, Giff Howard joined our team and brought his sense for teaching that connected well for me. I mean, I connected with Giff in terms of the way he explained things, and I saw how he made it how people quickly learned how to advance at a very fast level. So right. when you know, again, following in the same kind of suit as you, Tom, when we saw people we thought could add and help the team, that, you know, we're all about that, and it helped us, right? And it helped us do what we did at a higher level. So some of it was, again, the bass, some of it was what we could write on the actual instruments. And when we really got to a place where, all right, we actually can really explore a more sophisticated or a more mature level of orchestration, you know, that's when we also grew our, you know, technical facilities by, you know, enhancing our team that could bring higher levels of skill. Yeah.
Well, and I think we had like instruments, and so it was easy. You know, if you had you know 2 or 3 marimbas and they were all different, I mean, you're probably going to approach a little bit differently. So we started getting like instruments. So for the Blue Devils, I know this is wrong to think that, but you know, I mean, you guys played a lot of jazz, but so what was your approach, Jeff? When we're talking technique, is it some of the same stuff that these guys are talking about, where it was Burton on the vibes, and then you played Stevens, and then you converted the whole group? I mean, you know, what was your process?
Well, in terms of grip, we played Stevens on everything.
Like when you started, when you
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
before that, Vibes were using Burton, but um, my players were moving around from instrument to instrument a lot, and I would rather work on one grip rather than
Right.
two, really. And for myself, the only time I ever really have used Burton grip is in multiple percussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting how that all. I mean, you figured out the grip which was best for what you had, which was if you had kids moving around playing different instruments. It's like you're gonna have a snare player playing traditional who's gonna go play quads. Well, you might as well go to match grip, right? It just makes sense, to do some of those things. So I think, listening to you talk, things evolve because this is where we're at, and this is what we need to do to evolve. Whether it's the grip, whether it's the instrument, whether it's I guess the overall approach because of not having things amplified. Once we started amplifying, you went, oh, okay, now we can adjust the technique a little bit. So Jim, maybe going over to you, maybe talk a little bit about the technique that you guys had. Plus, where did this whole thing to have four vibes or four vibes, 4 or 5 vibes, 4 or 5 marimbas? When did this? I was thinking about this. Was there a year that someone went and did this, and there was like, oh, there we go?
I'm not sure of years, and I am terrible with numbers. Like I do know, like when I started writing for the Corps, we had maybe 7 or 8 people in the front ensemble. That was it, which by today's standards is pretty small. But we were maybe a little bit different in the fact that we didn't necessarily require our players to play one grip over the other. We kind of like took the players who seemed to have the right musical sensibilities for what we were looking for, and if they were a Burton player, they played Burton on marimba. If they were a Stevens player, they play Stevens on vibes, and we did that thing where they'd run around from like maybe on the opener they're playing vibe 2, and then for the ballad they run over to the marimba and play marimba. I don't remember exactly when that started kind of calming down and there was less running around up there, but all that said, I mean there is a lot of it makes a lot of sense to have everybody playing the same technique.
Right.
But we were, some of it is probably our own stubbornness, and we were always kind of like of the mindset that like let the music dictate how it's supposed to sound, and if this person can play that part with a Burton grip, then like we don't need to like try to stick a square peg in a round hole. But I'd say.
I guess what I was thinking is, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, is so we're trying to think when it evolved where you had 5 marimbas, 5 vibes, and you were teching the ensemble like it was a snare line and a tenor line, because you had to get these 5 players in each of these sections to look and sound the same. Because I think it was cool, like what you were saying, the music dictated, and what skills the players had, like what grip they would use and what they were comfortable with to play to get a good sound and a good quality and control. Like, when did this happen where it was like, bam, we're all using Stevens and we have these exercises that are like, like we're teching a snare and tenor line, I guess. Anyone, I mean, if anyone,
well, I think,
go ahead.
Like the I don't know if it was when we had 2 vibes or 4 vibes, but we, most of the time, at least the way we set up our ensemble, we'd have those vibes split on either end of the front ensemble, and it would kind of create this stereophonic sound, and we would actually have one set of vibes tuned at A440 and the other set of vibes tuned to A442, which would
so that's something you wanted to do.
Yeah, we actually did that on purpose. I think we learned that
cool.
from Scotty Sells, who used to write for the front ensemble before, in the early 90s. It creates this like just very subtle chorusing effect that kind of fattens it up a little bit. And I think we did that for years. I mean, it sounds ludicrous and ridiculous, but it was kind of a big part of our sound there for many years.
I remember,
but
I remember Ralph telling me exactly the same thing.
Huh.
That's
And that
not-
wasn't just an excuse for the fact that the bars were out of tune.
Well, maybe it was back then.
I have a perception on that. If I would, I think a lot of what changed. I think the Cavaliers moved us forward. They moved us in some way when they really got to pods, when the ensemble setup became more of a percussion pod, and each player had their zone, like as if you were playing a percussion ensemble piece, and you may have mixed amount of things to play, but you're not doing pit drill, and that's my perception of that. And I think competitiveness started to, and it might not be for everybody, but when you started to see people in a set position with their instrument and always at their height and their comfort level and so on and so forth, people were playing at a more mature level. And you're watching some of the things going on when the tall guy goes over to the short vibraphone, and then the short guy goes over to the tall. It became a circus of sorts. What you realized was, you were influenced by others, and I'm speaking on how that Cavalier excellence was there. Is that was something to measure yourself against, and you'd see some technical proficiencies there where you're going, yeah, we're not in that ballpark. We may have our own qualities of that we bring to the table, but there's a disconnect there. And from an adjudication standpoint, I used to say this a lot of times. I used to hear it, and Eric, you referred to it too. It's like you wanted people to, think you guys were pro before you even hit the bar, right? A professionalism. Well, if you don't look professional when you're playing, I think a lot of adjudication starts to judge with their eyes as much as their ears. So, I think we were factoring that in there. It's like, how do we upgrade the professionalism? And there's one other thing I want to add to this too, is we started to see if we were going to have a higher level of marimba achievement. And I do think we did turn as an activity where instead of a holistic percussion ensemble, it became there were marimba players were the snare drummers of the pit. And that, there was, whether you liked it or not, that was how it was going to be viewed. And, even to this day, you could argue with it, but let's be honest, right? Right. I think the studs play marimba. No one comes in saying, can I play fourth vibe? Because I like the Bell and Critali setup that allows me to, no, the guys want to play, they want to play marimba. They may want to play timpani too. But so I think the competitiveness, I know for us, we didn't have enough good players. Again, God, I loved all our players. I mean, no offense, but we were not a deep enough physically talented group that we could see guys, like 7 or 8 different people being on marimba. We had 4 or 5 people that could play marimba well, and zone them in, get them comfortable, get them in their setup, and really kind of raise the standard so that we could kind of compete in that arena.
That's exactly what we had as well. There was only about 4 or 5 guys that could hang on marimba and really have the technique to play, what the marimba part would what it would demand. It's interesting you're talking, Tom, about the pod setup, or maybe it's Neil. That actually started back in the early 90s with Jim Campbell and Kevin Lepper. They were trying to create percussion setups, like a multi-percussion setup for everybody. Like, say if you're playing a multi-percussion piece, you've got everything. You got a keyboard, you got your congas, you got your suspended cymbals, and that's what they were trying to do. And you go back and look at some of those early Cavaliers, and they had developed these frames that they had made themselves, and they were doing that. And of course, when Don Prococo started making frames, all of a sudden that started coming together. I think the first year they had the frames, the Prococo frames was, I think, 94. And I saw them, and they had the pit staggered, and everybody, did their thing and stayed that right there. But that's something that had started, long before I got there. There's so many things that I can't take the credit for sure that were in place. I just picked it up and kept going for what was already started there. But that's just a lot of, I guess, evolution there of things that with percussion ensemble in mind. What the music dictated is what, like Jim was talking about.
Well, here's a funny story. So I want to say it's right after '92. We're at the DCI convention. I don't know if it was in December or January. And so we're in the percussion caucus, and Jim Campbell stands up. Now, this is such a long time ago, but I looked at Jim, and he's like, he was kind of telling people that we do this pod thing, and we look way more professional, and we should get more credit. And then these other groups that are running around, I mean, it's very distracting. And then I think there was a visual person from the Cavaliers that was there, and yes, so he's saying yes, this is ridiculous. We should be watching the core march, and the front ensemble should be stationary because they're not in a pit. They could see them. I don't remember the exact words. I was just like, but he was right. You know what I'm saying? Like looking back now, I went, yeah, you guys, it was a lot cleaner and made sense. But
I do think he was right. Like, because honest to God, if we were looking on a stage, a giant wind ensemble setup or a giant orchestral piece or even a percussion ensemble, and we're watching people like run across the stage to get to something, we would say you did a bad job of figuring out your setup.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, honestly, Jim was right. And
no, don't give him credit. I'm going to have him on in a couple of weeks. Don't give him too much credit.
I want to be. Before I go, I just want to. One time I said something nice. I did it on public record. So.
Well, here's the other thing. Just listening to what you guys were talking about. So, in the '80s and the '90s, we really had to teach our butts off, and a lot of times it was like you had your 4 or 5 players. And then you just kind of knew that the cores with the teaching chops were going to get to be competitive. I mean, at the Cadets, we always thought, Neil, like, we're going to win drums, we're going to be at the top of the level, we're going to be at the top of the game here because we have the staff to do that. We may not have the best players. When you look at the 80s with the Blue Devils, those drum lines with floats lines, man, those kids were off the charts. And then you look at the kids that were marching in Garfield, it was like middle school and college, literally, as far as the overall talent. But somehow we were able to compete with them at a high level. Let's go to right now. We probably wouldn't be able to do those kinds of things like that. I mean, what we do now is we all go after the best talent, and they have to have experience. They have to, be road tested, whether it's drum corps or indoor. You're looking for and you're looking for kids that are in like a world group. If they come in, they're ready to go, and all we're doing is we're teaching them a cadet style, a Cavalier, a Blue Devil, Vanguard style, and the the music dictates that, and here you go. You go out and compete. But man, back then it was like, whatever we had, a lot of times that's what we had to teach and we had to go with. Now, like you're saying that, Eric, and we were saying, like Neil and I are saying that, like, was that for like the Blue Devils and the Vanguard, or again, were you guys like, yeah, we got this. Look at the kids that we have, like what was going on at Vanguard, I guess.
Don't break our bubble. Don't bust our bubble. That's what we thought. And
that's what we thought, at least, I guess.
I don't leaving to go to the Blue Devils a lot of times.
Jeff's like, yeah, well.
The whole production. And, some of those early years that I was working with the group, I mean, we had great people, but like there was times it's like, man, we are the bad news bears out there, and we're just trying to we're just trying to keep it together and make it happen and try to, do the core proud. And, I'm proud of everything that we did, but it's like, man, yeah, there are years where it feels like it was an uphill battle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tom, you were talking about the level of talent, back then versus the level of talent now. Over the years, and I think you probably all will agree with this, you saw the level of talent increase due to the level of music education that was taking place in schools, and also due to the internet. Students having exposure to things that we didn't have exposure to.
Right.
You think about when we were kids, if we'd had the internet, I'd have been a much better player, but over the years, the players the level of them just kept going up and up and up. And it got to the point, in latter years, and this is just, it was one of the things people always say, oh, you teach Cavaliers. It's like, well, yeah, it's easy. Anybody can do it. You have great players. So we just get to mess with the scoring all summer. It's fun,
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, you have to make sure stylistically everybody has the same approach. But that's one of the things I noticed through the winter drumline activity, and drum corps, that, everybody's is getting really strong players these days. I'll talk to Alan Miller at the Cavaliers and say, well, what's the talent look like? And he goes, it's fallen off this year. Not that he said that this year. Some years he'll say that. And I'll go and see him. I'm like, what are you talking about? Everybody plays great. His level of expectation is much higher than what mine is and was, in the earlier years.
Right.
The whole thing continues to move, right? I mean, so
yeah,
big time.
Bar is, continuing to do that. And no one, it's as great as our groups have been at different times, no one has gotten to that place. I would think you all agree with this, is where you went, well, that was perfect. There's nothing. There's always something, and there should be, right? There always should be. And it might not be right or wrong. It might be, I'd like a different color or sound here. I'd like a different inflection. But isn't that part of the beauty of music? Is you're never really done trying to get to the next step.
Right. Well, so here to me, what's interesting is, so I've been doing this for a long time, like writing, drum corps, and a lot of everyone here has really kind of moved on, and I have Neil coming back, and actually I want to say having Neil come back just brought everything in focus for me, because as a writer, and I want to talk a little bit about the writing, I think you go through, it's like you're not on a straight path. You kind of go this way a little bit, and then maybe you kind of second guess yourself and you come back a little bit this way, and then you see another group and you go, oh damn, and then you come back this way, and then you see some younger kids going, no, I can't do that. You learn that, and then you overwrite, and then you go, and then you go, and then you're like, oh my God. And so having Neil come back, for me as a writer, good is good, excellent is excellent, achieving at the highest level, and sometimes some of the simplest stuff can be effective and demanding. You see it in indoor a lot, where it's just stuff is, I don't want to say like overwritten as far as the volume, but trying to save the world. And I think we've all kind of been there. And then you see some of the top groups go, they're still playing the stuff, but they know how to sprinkle it here and there. But the excellence is what is still key. And that's 4 decades, 5 decades, whatever you want to talk. And so, this year, I have we want to play with a great quality. We want to play with clarity and cleanliness. It's like so when I sit down and write now, I go, okay, I got to think of these 3 things as I'm doing this, and how does that all kind of fit in to the total ensemble? So, again, writing for, literally 4 decades, it's like driving through the Appalachian Mountains, I guess. It's up and down, up and down. So I'm going to go to Jim a little bit, maybe. So what was your mojo? What was your style? What was your thing that, being able to sit down and write the whole package? And you were at the Cavaliers. You were kind of like were you like the program coordinator?
No, a program coordinator at Cavaliers was Scott.
I'm sorry,
Coder.
I meant Vanguard.
At Vanguard. No, I mean, there was years where I maybe took more of a lead role, but we usually had somebody who was maybe not a writer that was kind of looking more over the overall vision. Mike McCool was one of those many years. Made the best mixtapes of anybody you'll ever know. I still listen to him all the time. Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, Ralph was kind of my idol. He's the reason I marched Vanguard, and I wanted to find a way to, sound kind of like that, and also like build on my whatever classical background that I had at the time. So I was just all about percussion ensemble and just trying to be as you know, as legit as I could be, but still try to like play the game. So the nice thing about writing the battery and the front ensemble together is it kind of gives you, clearance to to kind of have your way with a lot of that stuff. And I I can't take all the credit because a lot of that stuff didn't always work, and it would have to get massaged and tweaked. And Murray Gussick would fix a lot of stuff or spice it up. Jim Ancona, who taught the front ensemble for years there, he made sure that my stuff didn't stink too bad. But I think it was always more about like just trying to write the percussion book as if it, I mean, yes, it's drum corps, but I always wanted it to be like a percussion ensemble, and you could stand back and listen to the battery and the pit play together and get a full experience and let it kind of stand on its own, even if the brass wasn't playing. And that gives you a lot of stuff to play with. And it usually meant that I ended up overwriting or like writing like 5 different lines in the front ensemble where you don't hear any of them because it's just not coming through in the texture, and those are the things that you have to kind of learn.
Right.
Just being kind of geeked on music and trying to sort of learn how to compose through orchestrating, and then the luxury of having these great players who are there every day, willing to kind of work it out for you. I mean, that's such a privilege that most composers don't even really get, and it really helped me to learn how to write. And I still feel like I'm trying to figure it out, but like having those live players there actually being able to do it right in front of you so you can hear how it happens, that was critical. Without that, I never would have been able to do what I did.
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of times I write as a technician. Like that's kind of part of, what I do. Because I was a tech before I started writing. So I'm always kind of thinking. And so if you look at my scores now, it's very detailed. So to the point where it's like, certain things will be wrist, and I'll put markings, which means a lot of arm. We'll put a little dot here. Tap height will be up a little bit more. That detailed and that technician mind that I had really kind of came from Hannah. And then like you with Ralph, it was like I wanted to kind of be like Tom. But at the same time, I wanted to kind of have my own, my own identity, I guess, with what I do. And I think having Neil be kind of a part of this whole thing, I think one of our strengths was that, like you're talking, like a percussion ensemble. You may look at the snare part and go, oh, but then all of a sudden you add the voice leading of the tenors to the basses with the snare part, and there's a marimba part that's kind of cool that's laying over top of that. You go, that's cool. So, and I'm going to let Neil maybe talk a little bit about this, but it was always like like trying to find a percussion voice. It wasn't the snare thing. It wasn't the tenor thing. And this is no knock on younger players, but, sometimes it's like, hey, I need a little tenor thing here. And they come back, I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't even go with the music. Like right now I'm writing a piece. So I'm writing the closer for Cadets right now. And I got the stuff from Jay, I think it was maybe Sunday. So the last 3 weeks, I've been listening to the original, right? Playing along, trying to figure out stuff in my hand. So I get the thing, and I go, oh, that doesn't even necessarily sound like what I've been working on. So the music said to me, I have to play this. And so within 2 days, I got it done. Because the music dictated what I was going to write, rather than, I got to stick that flam drag in there. I got to stick that 5-lit in there. It's like, well, it doesn't work in that music. You know what I'm saying? So, like, Neil, maybe talk about, I thought our strength really all the way for those, whatever those years were, 17 years, it was the unity from the front to the back.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think it working, you got to have a pairing that works, and it's not to be taken for granted that even really highly competent people, whether we were or not,
I was.
Are necessarily. I gave you that one.
You did. That's 4 for me, by the way.
I've watched other combinations where you look and you go, oh, well, these guys are phenomenal, and and somehow it just doesn't go. And sometimes I've even been witness conversations with people as they're talking about how we're going to make this happen, and they talk over each other, and they don't really come together. I think that, I think the relationships either work or they don't. And there has to be an understanding of someone's going to be a leader. And, you know, this, when we would talk about possibilities at the end, someone had to make a decision. Ultimately, you might take some suggestion I do, or you may want to lean more towards something you want to do. But once we made that decision, that was it. I mean, it was done, and we were going there. It was about embracing what was going to work inside of that. I look at it today, and I think if I'm hearing you say this, is how it worked to me is I think writing music became it was a big escape. The process of writing takes a while to get into, to get genuine and to get authentic and to get like in there. And then are you listening to the right things? Are you attached to the musical things? And I think I was fortunate that I could do that. And because there was a respect for who I was working for and the hierarchy, how we decided things were going, it was just for me to be as genuine as I could. I think if I overthought that stuff, I'd screw it up. But I just kind of did what I thought seemed to be following with the direction of where we go. I'm uncomfortable a little bit talking about it like I had some kind of formula to it.
Right.
But I don't really think I did. I think that I just trusted some instincts and feelings, and maybe that's why, you know, I had a sound or a feel about what we created together. And I think the older I've gotten, probably the more I would have a hard time doing that a little bit. I probably would overanalyze it a little bit. I'd think about it a little too much instead of just being in there. And I think it's a little bit of a life story too, right? I mean, you know, we all talked about having the courage to take these jobs when we were probably too young enough to be smart enough to say no. You know, we were just like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. If you offered that to me today, and you know, not too long ago you did, I went, oh Christ, no, can't do that. You know, like, you know, you mentally get to a place, you get older, and you're more present, you know, and that serves you in some ways. But the I don't know, the spirit for just going for it. You know, I'm in the middle of reading a book about, you know, a Bernstein biography, and just talking about how fearless he was when he was young and how less fearless he was when he was older about, I can't do this. You know, I don't think I can do this. I think that's a natural thing about it. So, you know, we're all probably in a similar zone age-wise, and we all had the great fortune to work with people that we had love for, respect for, and we connected with what the style was, what the purpose was, and then it made you do your best work. If we were in conflict or we couldn't really get that together, let's be honest, we've all had other projects we've worked on that probably didn't go as good as the ones we're talking about now. The results weren't quite as good, and there's a reason for that. You know, there's a special formula when people come together, when it really clicks, and we should all be happy that we had those experiences in our lives.
Well, it's funny. I was just thinking of this. So through the 90s, it was always getting that timpani gliss in. Remember that? Like, dong, right? So where that timpani gliss, in my mind, where that came from was 1981 from the Vanguard, and I still was like, it was in the drum feature. To me, Vanguard always had this gliss, and so I think we learn. I guess my point is we listen to a group, and somehow that becomes part of us, and then somewhere down the road we write. And we kind of think about, like, you know, this Vanguard is like that somewhere in there, that, you know what I'm saying, those little snippets that are kind of all over the place. Or, you know, like the Cavaliers, the way they drummed. And I met Leif Marwe, by the way. He came and did some work for us, and I think it was 99. And he's like everything you play one way, it's downstroke fingers. It was like, and he was like, I'm like, well, that's, people don't play like that. Like, you can't get people to play like that. But when I met him, I went, that was the Cavaliers, him being part of the Cavaliers, and, you know, in the early 90s. But so you see the groups, you hear it, you talk to people, and you may not consciously be aware of it, but those things kind of come into your writing, like that timpani gliss. these guys would make fun of me all the time. Like, we got to get that boom, which was 1981 from the Vanguard. And I don't even know what the feature was. I know if it was Young Person's Guide or whatever was in 91. And even from what you guys did, Jim, in tilting the drums and that really kind of old style, I guess. I don't want to say Mahler, but there was something about the tilt and how you went about it that the style of that approach and your music was like, that's cool. So now somewhere along the way I write and I do a little bit of that, even though we're flat drum. You know what I'm saying? Like I was watching 2014 Cadets that Colin wrote. I must have played it like 6 times, and I'm like, it's cool. What is that? That's cool. Okay, so I start to play it. I don't really even know what it is, but somehow that kind of maybe is, maybe Colin will see a little bit of that in the closer I just wrote. We kind of learn from each other and we pick up on those kind of things. So Jeff, who did you write with? I mean, was Scott writing? Who was writing the battery? Who was your guy?
Well, initially it was Dave Glide, and then Scott came in '94, and that was an exciting season.
Yeah.
As to who was actually going to be writing the battery parts. So it was a little bit of both, or a lot of one and some of the other, and it's kind of a topic.
Well, here's the thing. I think there's different ways of doing stuff, right? I mean, I try to write it all, and I'm like, if I get stuff out to the kids, I feel like 100% that's going to work. I might try a couple things, but I'm not like one of these guys that do indoor now. A lot of them, right? They might even just get a sketch out and they go, nah, try this. Nah, do that. I'm very old school. I'm like, I do it 20, 30 times and try to make sure it's what it's supposed to be. Now, do we go back and change it? Sure. I don't know if this is true, but I know at the Blue Coats, I don't know if I was talking to, but they have a lot of different guys that write. And I guess the idea is to bring in, more creativity into the design. I even heard, and I don't know if this is true, that Tom wrote like some of the brass stuff, or at least where the brass would play. I mean, right now with this closer I'm doing, Jay sends his stuff to me, and I rearrange some stuff. So I took this over here, and I'll put a chord here, and I'll take the key, I'll take the keyboards here, and so I'll try to. So he's kind of writing a basis, and then I'll go in and adjust it based on the effect or where the percussion is going to sit. So I think there's obviously different ways of doing it, and the older I get, sometimes it's better to go, okay, write this for me, or sometimes I'm at a point where I'm going, what, if I write it myself, it's going to be right. I don't know if that's my being 57 years old. Damn it, it's going to be right. But I guess I go through some of that, as well. So how about we do this, guys? I want to take a look at a couple of the questions we have here, and maybe we can, let's see here. Okay, here's one here from Justin. What is your favorite non-performing front ensemble memory? Non-performing front ensemble memory. Well, first thing that came to mind is Jason Medeiros. We were at a show. It was 2000, and he fell on a flagpole and.
Yeah, he fell on the.
Remember that he fell and he got a bloody nose. And
he fell on the Green Monster, broke the marimba, and got a broken nose.
No, this was in 2000. I think it was in 2000. He fell and he had a bloody nose, but he's still playing, and the blood's dripping down. He's playing xylophone.
That's your favorite memory?
No, I don't know. It says non-performing for, and well, Jason Medeiros was one of my students from Dartmouth. So I don't know. I'm not sure. Does anyone want to answer that? Like, do you have any ideas or thoughts with that?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think what I look about is I loved when our groups, especially when we get to we're getting to the end of the year, and there's a vibe, there's a performance level that's just at a really special level, and we may be pulling into we just finished Allentown, now we got like 4 days of 12-hour days, right? And you're like going, okay, we could be rockheads and like continue to beat the crap out of this, or let's act more like professionals and like let's take care of some business. We're going to take care of playing. We're going to do things right the first time, and we'll play some wiffle ball and have a little bit of fun and
Right.
a little bit of enjoyment. And I want to give credit to Jamie Eckert really for kind of
Yeah.
helping that tone. Is like when I first came on, I was such a hammerhead. Like I just wanted to grind every second, and I thought that was I thought that was a responsibility to do.
Right.
And I learned from Jamie that you really don't have to do that. And in fact, you're probably going to make it. You're not necessarily going to make it better. You can make it worse. So learning how to pace it. And when I came to drum corps, I didn't know the length of the day. I didn't come up in that environment, so I didn't know that it was the long game, not the short game. And sometimes I was there for short period of times. I just wanted to go a million miles an hour. And I learned from Jimmy how to go, it's okay. It's all right. And yeah, so for us, when we were really getting good, that's when they would knew when we kind of would pulled off that. And that's when they got a sense of confidence, their personality came out more. They flourished more. But I give Jamie the credit for that. And I did love those days. And fortunately, we had a good string of those days.
Yeah. All right, here's another one. Why is it that marimba is preferred to vibes? Is it projection, rage of instrument? I mean, I kind of have my own thoughts with that, but anyone want to take that one?
Jeff.
Yeah.
Me? Oh, Jeff, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, ego.
There you go.
Because I'm not a fan of the marimba line and the vibe line, and the person who's playing Glockzilla, back behind, and that's all they do. But quite honestly, the vibes can be a lot more difficult to play than marimbas because you're involving pedaling or dampening with mallets. It's a whole different beast, and I love marimba, but to me, it's not the end all be all of the fun ensemble instruments.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that with the marimba, it's Neil and I talk about this where you try to play fast 2 16th notes on the vibes, and it's not meant for that. Like the vibes aren't meant for some of the virtuosic, tempo things that we do with drum corps. Drum corps is about like the wow factor, and so to me, the marimba it's a big instrument. You can do a lot of cool things with 4 mallets, but yeah, you can do 2 mallets, and man, the ranges of I guess what you can do from a facility and technical standpoint seems to be more. Now, I do agree with Jeff where the vibes, there's probably some things there that are more difficult because you have a pedal and the instrument rings a lot. You have to learn how to play it and get the right articulations based off the music, and that I think is challenging. Even at school, sometimes we'll play some percussion ensemble stuff, and it's like if the pedaling's not written in, you have to kind of define it. And even young players, that's like an added thing. I mean, if you had a monkey on the floor that could just do the pedaling or something, and the kids just play, I think it would be easier, right? But you add that pedal, and sometimes it's harder. But we don't think of, that instrument like that. So, all right, here's a question for me. Do slight fluctuations in tuning make battery instruments have a fatter sound, a fatter sound as well? Do slight fluctuation in tuning? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been back and forth with different tuning schemes, and I'm kind of where I'm at. Where The last couple years, we've done a D on the bottom, D on the top. We've gone with this new softer head that Remo um, has. Better for the hands. I like a darker sound. I like to hear the separation in the guts. I like to hear the drum. I like to hear the tone. As soon as you start hearing the head, I feel like we got to change it up. We've gone with all the guts. We've taken a couple off. I do think the head has a lot to do with the fluctuation in the sound. Same thing with the tenors. I always like for Jim, like you guys, I always thought they really had a unique sound, which became Sibelius, the sound in Sibelius. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Well, the sound we recorded the 2004 Vanguard drumline at different stages of the season, and the front ensemble and suspended cymbals and tambourines and cowbells and everything he could think of, and that's what eventually became a virtual drumline, which a lot of people still use. So you hear that sound fairly often. I can hear it in like a TV commercial and just be like, there's those tenor rim shots again. I remember, I want to say it was like 1990. This is when I was still marching, but we had these, the drums were copper that year, and they weren't like a copper plastic wrap. It was like actual copper, and the drums were like crazy heavy. And I think the tenors might have even been either deeper or maybe even just bigger diameters that year. But that was the first year I really noticed, like, wow, these things are like throaty and big and punchy, and like they have a vibe. And to me, that's always kind of somewhat symbolized like the Vanguard tenor sound. And you know, I kind of like that's it's synonymous with like the way Murray plays drums just as a player. It's just you know, aggressive and meaty and just like it take no prisoners kind of sound.
Yep.
It's different though than like a real kind of high reefed, high pitched sound where it's maybe a little more snary approach. And I think a lot of people still had that sound back then, but it, well, I'm not really sure where I'm going with that. It just, it does seem like that at some point the tenor sound of drum corps and marching percussion in general kind of deepened and got a little bit more resonant. And I think that separated that sound a little bit from the snare. Kind of it differentiated the section a little bit, which I like. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Just again, doing this for 4 decades, it's I know what the sound is. So a lot of times, if I have someone come in that's hey, can I do my tuning scheme? You know, someone that's younger, that maybe is from somewhere else. I'm like, yeah, go for it. And I'm like, that's kind of cool. And then eventually we end up going back to what I'm used to, which is foam on the outside. You know, tune the snares a certain way, the tenors. I just know what that sound is, and I go, that's it. I don't know if that's the cadet sound or if that's what, after doing it for a number of years, I kind of go, that's what that is. You know, sometimes
you're just set in your ways.
What's that?
You're just set in your ways. You're stubborn.
I just know. I don't know. I know what that sound is, and sometimes it's hard for me to kind of go, like, to write it down. You know, I have some guys at school here. You know, over the years I've had a bunch of bass techs. Tom, I got this whole cool thing with the foam on the inside. I'm like, yeah, let's try it. Well, if you look at Dartmouth now, foam's on the outside. You know, we always go back to, because there's this sound that I always enjoyed and just kind of fits, I guess, you know, with our ensemble. So,
but the thing is you try new sounds. You don't just say this is it and everything else is off the table. You try things, you experiment, and you come back. You know what? I tried that, but this still works.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing is you know, like Neil said it. You know, I need good people around me, and sometimes it's like, yeah, well, let's try that. That's good. All right, well, let's keep that. Same thing with the tuning. It's like I go, yeah, like, you know, Colin came in 07. He brought a special kind of gut that Yamaha was kind of messing around with, and I was like, that's cool. And then I think the next year we kind of went back to the sound I wanted. So it's like I think it's you know, it's making a soup the way I always do. And someone says, yeah, well, let's put a little bit more pepper and salt in. Yeah, let's try that. Okay, that's not too bad. And then, you know, you eat the soup, couple times and you go, yeah, that's too much salt, that's too much pepper. You know, you always kind of, I guess, not always go back to that sound, but it's like I know what that is for us, you know, for the cadets, I guess. I guess that's what I'm saying.
I think it compares a little bit to drum set, like, people having their sound. And you can play around with different gear and, maybe different, but, eventually you kind of find what sounds right for you. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just what expresses, how you feel about the sound. And I think Eric's right. It'd be a different story if you went, no, I'm not open to listen to what something else sounds like.
Yep.
Try some things on. And I think you are actually underrepresenting yourself a little bit, because there are plenty of things that you do try and you go and you embrace some things.
Right.
And there are other things maybe you hold more near and dear to what you prefer. But I think it is a huge part why you're kind of in your like sixth decade of doing this, is like, if you were only stuck in a way,
right,
and you weren't evolving, you wouldn't have if you didn't keep taking on new information and making it part of your arsenal, not only as a teacher but as a designer, then you wouldn't be doing this.
Tom, one of the things that I noticed, that even when I tried new things and I tried to sound different, it would sound incredibly different to me. Somebody would hear it and go, "Yep, sounds like the Cavaliers." And I'd be like, "What? I didn't accomplish that at all." So no matter how hard I tried, I could only sound the way I sounded.
Yeah. No, well, that's true.
Believe me, I studied a lot of different drum corps. I studied Neil style, studied Jim style, studied Jeff style. I mean, I listened to everything. I used to be the biggest drum corps geek. I mean, I would sit on the front row and just sit there and take notes and watch, and so I studied it all. So when I started writing, it was like this tunnel vision. I could sound one way, and that was it. It's like,
yep.
Well, it worked pretty damn good for you. So
yeah.
It was smart not to mess it up too much.
I feel like we were all trying to keep up with what you were doing, Eric, like orchestration wise. It's like,
I feel the other way about all that. So thank you.
All right, let's do one more question, and then I have a question for you guys. We're going to kind of wrap it up here. As a percussion educator of then and now, what are your thoughts about the mallet player being a drummer first? I'm gonna go with that one, because, and then you guys can kind of hop in. I think that's important, and we used to do that at the cadets, where kids would play on pads. And I mean, right now I'm doing my Zoom classes with my kind of 10 front ensemble players. But so Mondays is drum pads, then Wednesday, Friday is the carpet right now. Although we did pass keyboards out last Friday, but learning that technique. And I've noticed, like, if we have a piano player that decides to come into the percussion program, let's say like 9th grade, man, it's like the reading is like they're playing a piano. But somewhere along the way, they hit a brick wall because they don't have the drummer facilities to get past that. Then you see the opposite, maybe, where, I try to get all my kids to be well-rounded, but we'll do percussion ensemble classes, and then like clink, 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 but they finally get it, and they're like, and their quality and their look and their touch is stronger because they have that drumming background. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I personally totally agree with you. I think they need to start with the fundamental technique of playing on the pads. I've taught ensembles where kids were mallet players all their life. It's like, okay, we have a concert snare drum part. Can't play it.
Yeah.
What? You can't play buzz roll? No. And like, how did you get here? And so a kid needs to have the technical facilities to do everything, and it's going to really enhance what they do on the keyboard.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, so here's my question to you guys, each of you, and I don't want you to be humble. I want you to drop that. What's like one thing that you did which kind of changed, that helped change front ensemble for the better, in drum corps for the 90s and 2000s? I mean, or just it could be whatever. Like, was it one of those like, I did this. We went, like to all Musser, and then all of a sudden it was like, boom, we did this. So I don't know, Jim. Let's go with you first. And again, like what you think you did. It could be a writer, could be maybe something you did with Vanguard from a stylistic standpoint.
I mean, I mentioned it a little earlier, but like focusing on the whole ensemble is something that I think it was what I have later come to realize was a strength of mine. I wasn't just
Right.
focusing on the battery or just the pit. I was really kind of trying to think about the whole thing at once, and I think that that came through. I also, and I was primarily writing before. I mean, amplification became a thing when I was still at Vanguard, and we were doing that at Cavaliers when I was there. And I think my last year there was electronics were. It was like the first year electronics were allowed. But one of the things that I think I used to enjoy most about doing this stuff, especially with the front ensemble, was just like trying to design new sounds. And sound design back then did not mean getting your sampler in your computer. It meant like go to the hardware store or the junkyard and or like crank down a concert tom on top of a PVC pipe and like whack on that and see what it sounds like. And so there's like some of those years where we were like making up new sounds or blending just simple sounds like octobans and cowbells or metal pipes that are cut to like weird, they're kind of in tune but kind of not in tune, but when you blend those with other instruments, like it creates this whole new color. Those are the things that like I just get super geeked out by, and they're probably not the main things that people remember, if you're watching the broadcast on TV, but like that's the stuff that like really kind of gets me going. So like the first year that I started writing with Eric at Cavaliers in 2008, it was, for a while, it was like a little bit like pulling teeth for me because I didn't know how to like let go of the baby so much.
Right.
And like he's in charge of that now. But we did collaborate a lot, but it actually freed me up to kind of like think of other things. Like we had a dulcimer in the pit, and we had like this thing where we were trying to simulate the sound of a Japanese wood flute, but we couldn't use that because it was a woodwind instrument. So we got a slide whistle and figured out how to like kind of simulate that.
Right.
We had glass bottles one year, or we even had like a little Zen fountain in the pit with a little mic in it, just to kind of like create some atmosphere. And like, I love that stuff.
Don't forget the tank drum.
Oh, the tank drum. Yeah, I have those right over here actually. Yeah. Or the water phone, or the like. Just all those fun sounds that are maybe not the first thing you think about when you think front ensemble, and like the question that came earlier from a marimba person. Like, yeah, everybody loves seeing marimba licks and stuff, but like, everybody does that stuff. Like, what can you do that's like new and interesting that might make somebody kind of like perk up their ears? And
right.
I was always like intrigued by that challenge.
Yeah, I think that was, like you're talking about, that was kind of a mindset. It was like, we have to, what kind of colors are we going to create? Because, we didn't have, whatever, main stage or whatever to create those sounds. We had to go and find different sounds. So that's some stuff that I forgot. Like that was kind of part of our conversation, Neil and I, was, all right, so what are we going to do differently here? How are we going to create different sounds? So, but I agree, like your front like the total ensemble, was always very impressed with what you had done. From the battery to the front ensemble, and then how everything kind of fit together with the brass too, I thought was always, at such a high level. So if we go to Jeff, what is, besides the Blue Devils just kicking everyone else's butts for 1,000 years, like what are some things that you think in your years that you were at the Blue Devils?
I kind of just did what I did and relied a lot on, quite honestly, my contemporary percussion background. So I did the drum corps thing, but I used a lot of, kind of what we just heard in terms of like creating composite sounds. You think back to Perez or Stockhausen and some of those composers, and
Cool.
they were envisioning electronics and they didn't really have them, you know?
Yep.
So, before electronic keyboards and stuff were in drum corps, lots of times I would have to sit there and just figure out, okay, what sort of composite sound could I do that's going to make it sound like something else? I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm proud of everything we did.
Well, I think here's the thing. I was just thinking when you were talking about that, like, not that we're not creative now, but we didn't have the electronic stuff. We didn't have the stuff that was mic, so we had to kind of really think outside the box with different things. Nowadays we had a staff meeting and we're talking about, like, well, how can we create that sound? And I went, Brandon, and he goes, oh yeah, I can do that. We can do anything we want now, right? But back then you had to kind of go outside the box and try to figure out how to create those sounds and then be your own, sound, I guess. That was important. We wanted to sound like the Cadets, but yet there was things that, we wanted to try to do that were kind of outside the box. So I don't know. I think it was harder. I think it was harder than it was now, because we have better players, and we can jack up the sound and we can find the sounds and, So let's go to Eric. You're going to tell me it was clean instruments.
That's it. That's all I wanted. I was trying to do the same thing we were all trying to do. We were trying to get the front ensemble to be heard, and have a contribution, because you had these acoustic concert percussion instruments with these, bugles or G instruments and marching percussion behind us. And so, we were all, everybody here was working on how do we get the contribution in the front to get the effect, up in the box. We all wanted our keyboards to be heard past the track. And one of the things I always wanted, I wanted to do it with a softer, warmer mallet. So I was constantly working on things, and it was so funny. I was talking to Alan Miller today. He goes, be sure you and he'll laugh if he hears this, be sure you talk about the marimba scoops. One year I went to this elaborate thing and made this vinyl. It was made from a drum cover, came down behind the marimba and went on like this. And it was basically a sound projector for marimba. It worked, but it was such a pain in the ass to make. It's like, we're not doing that again. They wasted a whole day trying to make one of those things. But we were constantly working on things. Like I used to find, okay, in the summertime, it's humid. What happens when it's humid? Sound moves slower. It's okay, the sound's moving slower, or the air's moving slower, excuse me. So the air's moving slower from the bar to the resonator. Okay, well, that's making your sound smaller and shorter. So we used to raise our resonators past what the settings were on the factory settings. We had to figure out how to do that. I would also try things like I would tilt the instruments forward. I would put blocks under the back wheels. I know this sounds crazy, but what it is, it exposed the resonator openings more to the audience like that, because your sound's coming out at the top of the resonators, not the bottom. So I'm trying to expose it more to the audience. I tried plexiglass under the instruments, just anything we could do so you didn't have to have, you didn't want the pit to be heard because it was so obtrusive. Like, okay, we hear you guys, tone it down. You wanted it to blend. You wanted to have this sound where you might not hear it, but if it wasn't there, boy, you really missed it, because you were able to use a softer mallet and get that up into the stands.
Yeah. Yeah, the things you guys are talking about, I just go, yep, because I remember that. Yep. It's, you get away and you get used to the or the electronic stuff and where we're at now, but you forget all those things. And I think it was harder. I just think it was harder trying to get good sounds and have those sounds project into the audience.
We went through a lot. Everybody did. And again, it's just as the instruments progressed and the manufacturers made progress with it. Neil, I was going to go back to when you were talking about the instruments in 1992. and I could talk about this because I was teaching Night Express, who had much worse instruments than you. So I can definitely talk about this. I remember watching it. Here comes this marimba. It's missing about 5 resonators on the top end of the accidentals. It's like,
Oh, it's fine.
It's like it's missing teeth, you know?
Just don't play those notes. You'll be fine.
Fine.
But, you know, the instruments progressed, but, you know, during that transition, we were always like, how can we make these instruments not just be heard, but have a good quality of sound in the process? You know, and, you know, I always wanted a concert sound, but how do you do that without, you know, again, using, you know, a polyball on a marimba? It just, you know, it's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
So,
All right, Neil. So how about for you, buddy?
Yeah, I mean, you changed everything because of that approach, and we all benefited from, you know, what you did there.
thank you.
Yeah, totally.
It changed everything, and we're all fortunate for it. I think I don't know. That's a hard question. I'm glad I heard you guys say the same thing too. I don't know that any of us are particularly comfortable with saying, you know, what did you do? What was your secret? You know, none of us. I think we did what we thought we should do, and I think when you're younger, you have a lot less of an idea of what you're doing, but you have a lot more confidence to do it. You know, and listen, we've all had staff guys that we look at now, and if we're more mature and we know how to look at it, we kind of listen and go, yeah, I remember having that kind of confidence. You know? But I don't know. I think I could say this. I like harmony. I like counterpoint. And I got to work with Jay, who, you know, was his harmonic language, you know, I think drum corps wise is, you know, pretty legendary. And you know, I was such a Burton guy, meaning, you know, his influence of his playing, and not as in I'm a jazzer, but just what the vibe could do, what playing could be, line, shape, harmony, and I just really loved that. I felt that I had a vehicle to be able to do that, and kind of encouragement to, you know, to dive into that and bring that kind of little bit of sauce. It was okay for us to play a lot, you know, whether it was, you know, we had to figure out, a lot of us did, like what was too much and what was clutter and what, but we had the availability to go after some things with a lot of energy. And I think it was a nurturing. It's hard to imagine I'm saying this about the cadets of the early 90s, but there was, at least in our musical world, a nurturing for, go for it, man, give it a go, like let's hear that. And you know, I remember the first drum on the percussion ensemble where the pit played with the drum line, and you know, I kind of went for it, and I wasn't really happy with the level we were at, but I was totally turned on by the vibe that everybody had about what Tom and I were kind of creating for a different sound together, and that got me really, really excited. So, you know, I think, you know, I think, yeah, I think the exploration of line and energy and going for it at a kick-ass level, I think is kind of what we like to do.
Yeah, I think energy was our thing. Was, you know, if something was comfortable with the players at 170, we went 190. You know what I'm saying? If things were, you know, like you shouldn't play a triplet roll at 200, we went 212. You know what I'm saying? We always tried to push the envelope based on tempo. I mean, I still do that a lot. I mean, it's funny, even at the indoor, people are like, yeah, Angst is at it. He's gonna, I'm like, I don't tell them, we just keep moving the tempo up. But there's something about tempo with me that just, when it's at the right tempo and you're playing some stuff that's just like driving, it's just like, whoa. You know, sometimes if it's too comfortable, then it's like, yeah, it's cool, it's clean, but man, it's got to have that energy and that drive. So it's interesting you say that. All right, so gentlemen, it is a little after 10. This has been awesome, and I hope our viewers enjoyed this tonight. You know, I learned a lot. And this is, you know, Jim was talking about getting geeked out. I get geeked out doing this thing just to listen to guys talk because, you know, you see the Cavaliers, you see the Vanguard, you see the Blue Devils, and you come up with what you think it is. Sometimes you're right. And then sometimes when you listen to experts like yourself, you go, oh, that's really cool. That's awesome. So thank you for joining me tonight. I do want to say we will have another one next Thursday, and it's the older guys, older than me. I say that with respect. We're going to have Dennis DeLucia, Joe Morello, the drum corps guy, not the drum set guy, and Jeff Prosperi and Charlie Poole. And we're going to kind of talk
Awesome.
pre-DCI. And I was talking to these guys about some stuff. You're going to be really fascinated when you hear some of the thought process that went into teaching back then. So be with us. Hopefully you'll be with us next Thursday, 8 o'clock. And we're looking at doing kind of a Midwest kind of drum thing coming up. I know people are asking about Paul Rennick. I'm going to have Paul on in a couple of weeks with Sandy, Neil, and myself. And we're just going to kind of talk about, you know, what we do as a team here. Although, you know, Neil, we're not going to get married, and they're married. But, you know, they obviously, it's interesting. I don't know if there's anyone else out there that is like that, where husband and wife, and they're there writing for, you know, a top level drum corps. That's in itself is fascinating. And Paul grew up in Pennsylvania, about 20 minutes from where I grew up. Really pretty crazy when I was talking to him on the phone. So keep checking, you know, social media, and we look forward to see everyone next week. I hope you enjoyed it, and we're out. So guys, thank you again. Take care, everyone.
Good seeing all you guys.
Yeah.
See you guys.
Putting all this
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
stuff. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Thank you, everyone.
Jim, Eric, Neil, take care, guys. We'll see you.
See you
Bye-bye.
later.